Welcome to tefl Ideas Podcast.
Okay. Cut. 4 sentences. What's this X? Back to me.
Good afternoon, Mr. Lewin.
Yeah, good afternoon. Welcome to the latest edition of the tefl podcast.
tefl Ideas.
Yeah.
Here we are. It's the afternoon here in China. We've taken over a teacher's office. Everyone's on a siesta. It's quite quiet.
Yeah, it's been a while since we did the last one. So, what's the topic for today?
So today is something I'm really excited about. It's something that I've done a lot of research on, something I've been really trying to upgrade into my teaching. It's EdTech and ESL, specifically flipped classroom and TEFL.
Okay, so let's explain, because maybe not every listener knows what a flipped classroom is. So can you define that?
Yeah, so a flipped classroom is where you literally flip the exercises. You take Bloom's taxonomy, where you're doing simple kind of repetition exercises in the classroom, and you have them do that outside of the classroom on their own time, perhaps on a media device, on a computer, and then you do more advanced kind of collaborative synthesis, analysis, evaluation work during the class time. So for like a math class, this might be students are doing a lot of the initial lecture-style classes through video, through Khan Academy maybe, and then in class time they can work with peers or they can get specific help where they need it from the instructor.
Right. Okay. Then. So just to define a few more concepts. What's Bloom's taxonomy?
Absolutely. Well, yeah, Bloom's. I keep thinking of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Very similar. Another one of these triangles. Bloom's taxonomy is this idea that we start off needing to know this basic knowledge-based, factual-based regurgitation of information. That's the basic level of knowing or understanding something. But to go at deeper cognitive learning, to be able to apply something on a deeper level, or to be able to memorize or retain something, you need to be able to use it in an evaluative or an application sense. So
would you be suggesting that the flipped classroom, that's like maybe learning things at home through different media, that would be the deeper understanding, or would that be the more surface understanding?
That's the more surface understanding.
Right.
It's really just about economy, this model. It's about efficiency and time.
Yeah.
So a good teacher, a good class is always needs to go up and down this pyramid from basic stuff, basic facts, basic formulas, basic boilerplate stuff, all the way up to being creative, being spontaneous, being able to apply and synthesize. What the flip model does is it's really taking students' time. It's using technology to infiltrate or to augment students' normal downtime when they're at home or when they're in self-study, to be able to have a structured space to do some of that work, groundwork, and then come into the classroom and get more directed help. And so why it's awesome, why I think it's such an exciting development for ESL teachers in particular, for TEFL in particular, is because language really requires a lot of this grunt work. Unlike maybe a liberal arts class or something like this, language requires, like math, a lot of practice.
Yeah. So what are the resources like available for TEFL, or ESL learners at the moment? Is there much out there?
Well, flipped in general is just burgeoning. It's flourishing. There's so much being dumped into flipped classroom resources.
But it's a kind of anarchy, isn't it? There doesn't seem to be much organization to it, really.
Well, especially in TEFL.
Yeah.
So flipped people have really got their stuff together in terms of math, science-based stuff.
Right.
Again, Khan Academy. But language learning is really kind of emerging. I think it's more primordial. And I think part of that is because, a lot of language teachers are in such varied situations around the world. So many of us are in international settings, and so many of us don't belong to these big groups or unions or what have you to organize those kind of resources. There are stuff out there for, of course, language learning. There's apps now. There's services and stuff. But what I'm talking about today is how we as teachers, classroom TEFL teachers, can use this model, can upgrade our curriculum if it is old-fashioned, or we can adjust our curriculum if it's trying to be flipped, but it's not quite there yet. What I call kind of imposter technology.
Fudging it, half-hearted sort of.
Yeah.
Right. Well, you don't want to fall between the two camps. You want to if you do it properly. I mean, I think, with upper learners, with the more advanced level learners, you it's all about authentic listening sources, isn't it? You give them authentic stuff. So I suppose you don't want to be directing them too much in what they're looking at, but certainly with the beginners and stuff, you want to be having specific videos and specific things that they're looking at, right?
Well, here's the thing. Yeah, and you're right. You know, we have to balance that dialectic of control and of our media and their choice, their interest-driven stuff. But flipped classroom doesn't mean, or hybrid courses don't mean that you have to dictate exactly what they're doing on their off time. It simply means we're using technology to create a virtual space, which projects our classroom out of the physical classroom and kind of makes it more eternally there. So that students, it's almost like it creates this arena, a social arena for us to create a profile, for instance, on social media, for us to have a sense of presence and identity. One way to kind of illustrate this is how for a progressive or an innovative flipped classroom might have a pen pal style counterpart in another part of the world,
right,
where they're having Google Hangouts, they're having Skype chats, they're having talks, even instant messaging talks, or forum posts, asynchronous stuff with another class, with an authentic audience, or with people who they share an interest with.
Well, the thing about language learning is that it's language is used outside of the classroom. The classroom is a very false environment
right.
to be doing language learning. The best classes that you have and the best place to be doing conversation is in a supermarket or walking in a park or something like that.
Or in a panel discussion, or in a courtroom. Wherever language is everywhere. And I think you're so right about the false environment. And that's so true of also standard content courses. We give science in a textbook and we say, read science. But they're not doing science. We give history in a textbook and they read history, but they're not doing history. So part of this flipped classroom model, I think, it forces us to think a little deeper, if we do it right, about how we're really delivering a 21st century curriculum, how we're really making things student-centered, how we're really making things project-based and meaningful, so that the students are able to get much more out of it.
So it's kind of like, it's homework, isn't it, essentially? And I think the homework's a really important thing because, again, like I said before, the classroom's sometimes the only place they use English, right? They might have a child at home, some of these students, or a brother and sister who is also learning English in school, but it might not occur to them to do a bit of English with their brother and with their family,
Absolutely.
or in an environment outside of the classroom. So if we can find ways to encourage that, I think it's a good thing,
Well, yeah, and part of it is just basic learning science 101, spacing and repetition. With technology, we can add new layers of spacing and repetition, and we can use algorithms to plot these out. Students can use apps or whatever to track how often, for instance, just simple vocab. They can use apps and platforms. They can use peers or instructors to check in on how they're doing. Right? There's all this data being generated automatically from all this tech. So spacing and repetition is one thing that the technology achieves.
And it's inputs, broadly speaking, like the more input you get, the better progress you make,
Absolutely.
And the quality of that input's really important. And I think sometimes learners can be, in certain environments, can be starved of input a bit. You you can't just watch television for hours upon end and expect the language to sort of be absorbed, be acquired by osmosis. It needs to be flipped back into the classroom where you do the creative stuff, the tasks and the role plays and so on. But
you're building subtitles, you're giving commentary. That's what I love. You mentioned about students in the real world taking videos, conducting interviews, doing recordings, right? Stuff like this where they're making things. And then they need to augment it. They need to go back and edit it. And it forces them to be reflective, to think about the language they're producing and the language they're hearing. And it also forces other people to kind of look at it. So with project-based learning, the two real pillars that everyone focuses on, or I think are really important, are audience and purpose. So if we're asking students to do an assessment or to do an activity in class, a lot of times the purpose is kind of left out of the discussion. We don't tell them why we ask them to do things. A lot of times it feels meaningless. It feels like hamster on a wheel.
Right.
But with projects, they should fulfill some real function in the world. Unlike maybe a science fair project where you're just trying to win a gold medal, maybe you're actually trying to investigate. We're trying to add to the academy.
Or you're trying to maybe post. Here's a idea. Post a comment on an article on an online newspaper or an online magazine. It's something with a real world effect, isn't it? My question is, how does gamification or gaming come into this? Does that gaming, is that relevant? Is that connected?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I'm proposing in this model is integrating Jim Paul G, who's a guy we talked about in previous podcasts. He's this literacy expert.
Arizona State University, right?
He's at ASU now, and he also is behind games for learning. And he's got a paramount book if you're in education. Everyone's got to read it. I think it's called "What Video Games Have to Teach Us About Literacy and Learning."
Well, a lot of people might poo-poo that idea and say, "Oh, it's video games. That's just kind of mucking around, and it's not serious." So how would you answer that objection?
Well, right. So I can't generally defend all video games. A lot of them are kind of just a waste of time, I would say. But there are great things we can learn from good video games about human psychology, about human learning, about human motivation, about human engagement, about skill trajectories, about literacy, actually. Which is kind of what this model is proposing. So he's got these 13 principles of what educators or schools can learn from games. It's kind of like a progressive lens to look at teaching and learning. It's kind of like getting rid of the old models about curriculum we've all kind of grandfathered in from our own experience as students, growing up in schools, as most of us have. We can kind of get rid of that simply by just shifting the whole thing and thinking about it through this lens of video games and how they work. So he's got these 13 principles, and what I've done is I've taken these principles and I've applied them, I've tweaked them to fit the tefl context.
Wow, okay. Let's start at the beginning then. What's principle one?
So principle one, there's 3 clusters of these principles. The first cluster is called empowered learners. And there's 4 principles within this cluster. So empowered learners is kind of like what we talked about in episode 1 with Freire, with the pedagogy of the oppressed or critical education, where we look at patterns of authority, we look at power, we look at control, we look at who's speaking, who's making decisions. Empowered learners is what video games do really well. When you play a game, you're a player. You're able to manipulate the world somehow. You feel like you make a difference. You're oftentimes a hero on a quest to do something.
Right.
So the first principle is called the co-design principle or the agent principle. And G talks about this as students are invited to participate in the game. They can alter the game world in some way. They can find alternative endings depending on the choices they make. New games now are open source. You can mod them. Is what game designers talk about, where you can create levels, you can create new skins. And now all of a sudden, these casual gamers are becoming part of a community where they're participating on a deeper level, where they're becoming perhaps programmers or designers or promoters or producers. So this is the co-design principle. And in ESL, we can do the same thing. We don't need to keep coming back to the textbooks, coming back to the curriculum all the time. We can invite students to choose and participate in what they're speaking and talking about. So that's the co-design principle.
Put the emphasis on the learner, right?
Yeah, so one of the things, one of my direct recommendations here is to have rubrics in the class as living documents. So if you assign an assessment, such as a project, we want to connect those with rigorous learning outcomes. But after the first week or two, we can invite the students to modify those rubrics. And with your approval, they should be able to choose a topic at the very least, which they're interested in, but they can still display their competency in a skill or outcome, and then propose an alternative project, an alternative assessment. Unless you're working in a very rigorous system. Like
it wouldn't work here.
Like the GAC.
Right.
It wouldn't work in GAC, but it would work with some of our other courses.
Definitely, definitely. It works with adult learners, I think, a lot better. They can pursue they can choose their own destiny, and they know what they want, they know what they're interested in. They're kind of paying a lot of money out of their own pockets for it. So
well, right, and this is kind of what this is the bigger issue with this, is that there's so many systems in place which prevent this kind of authentic learning. These authentic, student-driven, emergent, really community-based learning projects to happen, curriculum stuff and this kind of stuff. which slows us
It
down.
has to be about personal development, doesn't it? You know, that's what an empowered learner is someone who's doing it for their own personal growth. You're not just a machine who's there to drill a load of language and be churned out the other end. You're there to someone to develop yourself and do something that appeals to you and something with a purpose, you know.
And this is what you get with people who are just really into a video game. You know,
Right.
Why do they keep going back? Well, they're just, you know, if you've ever been kind of stuck in a game world, if you've ever been kind of sucked into one of these, or even a hobby, you know, why am I so driven to go back to that thing? Because you feel a sense of belonging, you feel a sense of meaning, you're interested in it, and you want to kind of grow at it. So that's what we're kind of getting at with these principles.
It could become an addiction almost for some people. I mean, I suppose language learning is addiction for really good students. You can see how you get hooked on it, you know.
You know, like the great thinkers. We look at who are the posters we have up on the walls. We got Martin Luther King, we got Gandhi, you know, we've got Einstein, we've got John Stuart Mill. Like, these guys were obsessed with questions. They were obsessed with issues. They were trying to figure things out. You know, they went back to it time and time again. A lot of them cultivated a community. You know, they had peers they were exchanging information with. A lot of them weren't. They were just kind of going to hitting the books.
If Nietzsche was still alive, he'd have like 1 million followers on Twitter or something like that.
He would have some awesome tweets, right? Nietzsche would have the best tweets.
Yeah, he was contentious issues. Yeah, you get that you divide opinion, and that way you get a sort of following. Yeah, I can see that. All right, then.
So that's the co-design or the agent principle. The second principle is called the customizational principle. And this, we kind of already hedged in here, where you allow students, every student's a different learning style. They're all able to, they should be able to get to the same end in a different way. They should be able to approach the content, approach the learning in their own way, at least in some sense.
Okay.
Every kid's got kind of a different skill set.
There's more than one way of doing it, right?
That's right.
Tim Toady, that's what the software guys call it.
Yeah.
So you give them enough freedom and flexibility and you don't overmanage them too much. You say, look, this is your space, that's the goal, find your own way, right?
Right. So, you know, in video games, there's different classes often in quests. You've got the healer, the fighter, you've got the wizard, you've got all these different ways to do it. And oftentimes, if you want to replay the game or you want to change the game, you can take on a new class. You can specialize in new skills. You can beat the game. You can do the game in a new way. So not only should we let people try out, you know, reach the same end, everybody should be able to get to the end of the race, even if they take different paths, but also we should invite people to try different ways of learning. We should create space in the class to try out different paths, right? Different learning ways of learning and doing. So this is the customizational principle.
And let them try and hack it. Let them try and cheat.
That's right.
You know, let them use use resources that others might not have thought of, and have a go that way. Yeah.
So one of my recommendations for flipped classrooms in ESL for this is to create a space, create part of the course to project these identities, to project these roles, to have specializations in the class, to what they say jigsaw the content, where you're breaking apart a project or a challenge, and then you're having each person kind of contribute in a different way to that issue. This is kind of expressed as social presence in flipped classroom or in EdTech research. Social presence is the idea that people are motivated by feeling a part of a society or a group. And so in flipped classrooms, this is a really hot topic for research or in fully distance courses, how do you get people to have a buy-in? How do you get people to feel like what they're doing matters and it's not just text on a screen?
Right.
So if you're flipping part of your ESL class, if you've got a technology platform and you're asking students to kind of go on there, for instance, as we mentioned earlier, and check their rubrics, they should also have a space there for storytelling, for forum discussion. They should have a profile page. They should be, for instance, creating media. So, you can have badges. Badges are a big way. And they can display those things as achievements that speak to their own individuality. So the identity principle is in teaching and learning is about why do we do something and who does this sort of work. So if we ask students to do algebra, we shouldn't just be sending vacuum-spaced algebra drill and kill at them. We should be saying, you know, how is this useful in the real world? What kind of people use algebra? Or who does chemistry? Who does, you know, how is this useful and why am I doing it? You know, think like a scientist. Think like a lawyer. Think like a fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Or a
Look,
teacher.
look at the whys, not just the hows of doing it, but the whys too. Yeah.
So with language learning, we talk a lot about role plays. In the last couple lessons, we talked about how important it is to set this rich, playful, but meaningful situation for language, for using it in a rich context. So with the identity thing, I saw you today in your class today. You had 3 columns. One member of each group is going to be a lawyer. One member of each group is going to be a teacher. One member of each group is going to be a scientist, psychologist. Yeah, so they're able to do that perspective taking, which is so important for a healthy kind of development of tolerance.
Yeah, put on a different hat.
Yeah,
Act out a different role.
And so that's one recommendation is rich role plays, and you can use flipped classrooms to generate media, durable media like videos, audio, podcasts that students can store as portfolio pieces. They can share on their social media. They can generate that audience again that they can try to get commentary or comments from other groups. They could share with another pen pal, quotation mark pen pal class. That's one recommendation. My second recommendation for Flip TEFL is to bring guests in from the community.
All right.
Either in person, in class time, or just invite them in for a teleconference or for a Skype call. If you're teaching a CLIL, content learning, integrated learning class on chemistry, environmental science, it's so easy to find anybody who would be so happy to come and talk to some kids about this.
Well, that's not done nearly enough, and that's such a good thing. Bring a guest into the classroom. That's a really good thing to do. They can learn so much from that.
Well, and especially if that guest somehow connects with a bigger project, a bigger summative assessment, where we're trying to for instance, we're trying to investigate how to reduce waste production in our community. Well, we invite the guest not just to practice language or not just to see a pretty face or maybe an ugly face, but to get useful information about really advancing some issue, advancing some project, which has some effect in the real world. So my fourth principle under empowered learners is manipulation, or sometimes we talk about embodied learning. And again,
it's a pejorative word. It's got a negative connotation.
Manipulation.
Is this a good thing? Manipulation? What do you mean?
Absolutely. Well, it's the ability for you to become the manipulator, right? So the empowered learner is manipulating.
I see.
So in a lot of times in early childhood education, they talk about manipulatables. Little kind of toys that kids can use to kind of work out logic, to figure out spatial reasoning, and to coloring and all this sort of thing. Tetris, physical Tetris blocks, this kind of thing. Well, the body, we are mind-body organisms. We learn a lot of us learn through doing, through touch, through this kind of thing. So we're talking about manipulations with games. You've always got some physical element in a game. If it's a video game, you've got a controller, right? You've got a cartridge, you've got a game manual. All of this stuff is involved. A lot of times when you're really involved in a very action-based game, you're jumping out of your seat, right? You're playing like Mario Party or Mario Kart. You're competing with a friend. You're turning a bend. You're making a win. There's this tension. There's this climax, and you got kids moving all about because they have this mind-bodied, embodied connection.
They've invested in it. Yeah.
And what often is talked about in this is flow. When you get to this state, people experience this state of flow where time is kind of in the background, and you're sort of in the moment and feeling it. And, artists talk about this when they're really producing their great work.
Yeah, right.
Writers talk about this when they're writing. And you know what? Gamers talk about it when they're having a great game session. You see this with kids, too, is when they're right into the music. When you've hit that sweet spot of I+1.
Yeah.
And they're able to say, this is slightly frustrating, but also I know what to do.
Right.
And you can see their legs start to go up and down. You can see them kind of start to think. That's what we're looking for with manipulation. So what does this look like? Look, we need physical stuff. Even adults love, you can just electrify a class with bringing in some kind of artifact or token to work with.
Realia, that's what it's called in ESL. It's, bringing in objects from the outside world, bringing in money, using paper money even.
Yeah.
But the classic
paper money.
Well, one of the classic or fake money, I should say. One of the classic ESL games is a bag full of objects, random objects, you know, a bottle opener,
Yeah,
a cuddly toy, and a pen knife, and a harmonica, and you bring them in and you get them to describe and use adjectives to talk about them. That's all realia, and that's manipulation.
Realia, yep, there it is. Yes, I've forgotten that term from my tefl training days. That's awesome. Right, realia, yeah, real day, everyday stuff.
Yeah.
And then, like with drama, you could, for instance, turn that stuff into a story.
Yeah.
Right. Turn that stuff into a sketch. Yeah. How do they appear? But so with more with more STEM classes, for instance, have them produce models. Right. Have them produce projects, durable things that they can display and manipulate.
Yeah.
Things that they can return to and work on. Or more basically, get kids out of their seats. You know, if you're doing try to create the environment, make the environment as immersive as possible. If you're role playing a courtroom, it's easy to arrange things.
Yes.
Thus, you bring a gavel in, right, and all of a sudden everything changes. You bring a couple ties in.
That's right.
Red tie, blue
Makes
tie.
all the difference.
Yeah. So manipulation, right? Keep things real. I also put in here a little blurb about what's starting to be called augmented reality apps. So augmented reality apps are these apps like you were talking about earlier, where you've got people out in the real world doing things, collecting data, going places. And there's apps now which use GPS coordinates, where you can send people on scavenger hunts, where you say like go here, and then once they get there, they get like some update on their tablet or smartphone, which maybe gives them a clue or another sort of thing. So for instance, you go to a fountain, or you go to a historical site and it gives you some data about the historical site. Then you have to go somewhere else and make a choice there. So you're taking the reality and then you're getting it augmented with metamedia from your app device.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Good stuff. What's the next?
Okay, so that is it for empowered learning.
All right.
So just a quick verbal review. We went over co-design, customization principle, identity principle, and the manipulation principle. And all of these ideas are taken from Jim Paul G's principles of game-based learning. They're about kind of sharing the power, giving it back to students, and inviting them to participate on a deeper level. And we're trying to recondition these for EdTech, particularly TEFL flipped classrooms.
How do you? It's all about kind of how do you make students a bit more active rather than just sitting there passively. You want them actually taking a bit of ownership of their learning,
Absolutely.
being more active, getting involved a lot more.
Yeah. Well, it's such a challenge, because it's so easy just to pick up the book and say, this is the lesson. This is the vocab list. This is the assessment. You know, this thing, look, it takes an investment. It takes a special teacher. You have to become a designer. You have to be open. But the good news is that the technology makes everything. The technology really can make things a lot easier. Yeah. They can accelerate feedback cycles. They can make, you can get updates on your cell phone. You can send messages so that you can be having conversations. You can be having discussions with students where you can get closer to the bone of what they care about. And I guarantee we can make any of these outcomes fit for these kids. We can have them be doing meaningful, learning, challenging projects, even within their realm of interest.
Yeah, the teacher George next door, he was talking to me the other day, and he's saying he's doing he's doing GCSE calculus and stuff like that. He's doing videos in Chinese because there's actually pretty much no videos on Baidu that are covering this particular curriculum, in Chinese.
Kind of like the Chinese Khan Academy.
Yeah, but it's like he's doing lots of different curriculums. He's doing GAC, and he's doing all different types and courses that are just not available. So so that's it's about empowering teachers as well, I suppose.
Well, that's exactly right, and this is part of my whole thesis here is that empowered learners are empowered teachers. Right. This ed tech thing can really change the way that we act as teachers. And when you start challenging yourself, when you go out on a limb, when you take a risk, and you try some of these 21st century projects, you're going to really surprise yourself with how much you're learning and also how much fun it is.
Certainly in a TEFL context, what's the best use of a teacher's time? The best use of a teacher's time is to be doing creative stuff with them when you're executing role plays and you're doing meaningful things with them, rather than drilling vocabulary, rather than drilling grammar, rather than drilling pronunciation, which is particularly like pulling teeth sometimes. literally pulling teeth. But why should we have to be lumbered with these kind of monotonous tasks, which don't give either us or the students a chance to actually use their brains?
Yeah, exactly. And it's 2015. We've got the technology. We really do, people. A lot of this stuff is free. I'm attaching with this document, with this thesis, a whole checklist of awesome free software platforms that you can integrate to make this work. You can get the language labs going so that the kids can come to class having done the prep work to go in there and start having a discussion or asking questions or working on projects, this sort of thing.
Yeah, look, I mean, just a couple more points before I finish. Yeah. I mean, in a TEFL context, what we do best as human beings and teachers is that we communicate. And what you can do, language learning is not all communicative. I mean, pronunciation drilling, grammar drilling, vocabulary teaching, that's not really communicative in many respects. And so that non-communicative stuff, that can easily be done and designed to be in a flipped, on a video, on a program, on an app where you're pressing buttons, where you're recording your voice. And then you could never let technology completely replace a human. Why? Because technology is not communicative, really. Yeah. It provides a platform, perhaps, but it doesn't provide the human being. But the other end,
spark
at the other end of
the Promethean, kind of space there. Absolutely. My mission is to give teachers this tech, to make teachers' lives much more, to make TEFL teachers' lives
easier.
Much more easy and also rewarding.
Yeah.
It takes a little bit of groundwork, but if you can put some of this stuff into your classroom where it's durable, which means it can be reused again and again, course in course, semester after semester.
Right.
And you can also find that students, when they're given apps, technology, when they're given media that they like to engage with, they're going to come and do it by themselves. They're going to play with the fun app. And they're going to review their vocab, or they're going to produce videos for their authentic audience because they're motivated to do so. We don't have to drill and kill it. We don't have to be the bad guy in the class.
Right.
But all of a sudden,
the authority.
We step back and the whole thing works with a little bit of the right design principles. So that's what this whole project is about: is getting us to put on the cap, to invest in becoming 21st century designers for the next generation of our students, and also for the world we're emerging into, which requires this kind of fast-paced, this ability to be teaching yourself, to come into a situation ready to solve a problem or ready to communicate and to find ways of producing value, in the real world.
It's interesting, is it? Because it's almost like the future of our industry, the future of ESL teaching is a sort of specialization towards the teacher as designer. And all the other stuff like teacher as input giver, we source that out to technology and various other resources.
Right. Well, and this is what Freire talked about in the Pedagogy of Oppressed. He talked about, the old assumption was that education is like the piggy bank, that we are delivering money and the students are the piggy bank, and it's just sort of bloop, bloop, bloop.
Yeah.
This is just it's just a fallacy. Or if it's true, or it just oppresses people when you do it that way, right? The new motto is co-creation. It's inviting them to participate.
Yeah, good. Well, I think we've covered quite a lot of stuff there. It's very interesting. Look, I mean,
I've got so much more.
I think a large part of it is really getting them to think and in finding creating opportunities for them to use their critical thinking or their thinking skills to solve problems. Games is about solving problems.
Right.
And, like someone once said, thinking is kind of the hardest work there is. That's why so few people do it. And
but it's so rewarding when you can actually do it with a peer group who's equally invested, right? When you can look at when you're working in a skilled and expertise group. It's like when you walk into a conference of robotic engineers, right? Or even more specific, like underwater robotic engineers.
I wouldn't know what's that like.
We have no idea what they're saying,
right?
But they're having,
this could be complete nonsense.
Right. But they're having a blast. Like they're able to exchange on this deep level, this very technical level. They're able to crack jokes, this inside in-group sort of thing.
Yeah, they own it. They own it.
And when you start engaging students on these group projects or class projects or school projects or individual projects, the relationships become much more rich and much more interesting. And so coming back to what you said about critical thinking, that is such a challenge with language teaching, because it's sad when you see people kind of saying, I don't want to teach language anymore. I want to go teach something like I want to go teach I want to go teach philosophy, right?
Right.
Which is great. I love humanities. Like I love talking about art history. And it's such a challenge to get to teach that in a second language sense. But at the same time, if you can get them, instead of teaching it the old-fashioned way, which is what we all experienced probably in university or grad school, which we were able to engage with because, we have the discipline, we have the interest, we have the language, the cultural equipment to do so. Our students don't. But we can still get them, the sparks, the interest, the appeal, and the usefulness of philosophy or art history, of any of that stuff is there to anybody. It's human, it's universal. But we can't teach it like it has been taught. We have to teach it. We have to invite them to participate. We have to invite them to challenge, to speak, to work it out.
I guess by encouraging them to make their own closed groups where they own it, where they've got this kind of clique going on.
Yeah.
Actually, by putting them in cliques and encouraging that autonomy, we're making the process of education much more democratic, right? Yeah. The controls going away from the one-way control of the teacher to the rest of them.
Right, and what you're talking about with these little cliques is so doable, but it takes also a teacher to be facilitator, to set the standards, to help them find an audience, to help them plan the project, to help execute and sequence kind of their skills. So this is a segue into my second cluster of principles. And we're just going to plow through this. This is going to be a long episode, but I hope you stick with us, or maybe you can take a break and
we could always break this into 2 podcasts as perhaps,
One of those old double VHS kits, you know what I'm talking about.
All right. Well, let's move forward then. Yeah, I remember those actually years ago.